I'm pleased to announce Dr. Zach Kohane, the chair of the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Harvard Medical School. Zach is a leader in the field of precision medicine, especially focusing on functional genomics and reclassifying diseases such as autism and cancer. And I had the pleasure of meeting Zach a couple of years ago. He co-organized the RAISE consortium, which stands for Responsible AI in Social and Ethical Health.
This? No. Hi, everybody. I'm starting my stopwatch to make sure I get done in 20 minutes. I have a lot to tell you. Do I have a clicker to get me through the slides? Line up the slides. So for those of you who don't know me, yes, I'm Zach Kohane. I got my PhD in computer science back in an earlier era of AI back in the 1980s. And then my thesis advisor, Pete Solovich, told me to finish up my clinical training. So I finished my clinical training in pediatrics and then pediatric endocrinology, and then created a lab and then a department at Harvard Medical School. I'm also editor-in-chief of a new journal, NEJM AI, that's been publishing for the last year. And let's get on with the show. So here's all my conflicts of interest, but it's not the real one. The real conflict of interest, the dark matter of conflict of interest, is people's opinions, and that is much more corrupting than any financial corruption, in my opinion. So I'm going to claim that we're right now AI is in the context, has to be understood in the context of a healthcare system under siege. All is not good. We have to understand what we are replacing or trying to replace or trying to augment. And so I'm going to make a few points. AI in medicine is moving both faster and slower than you think, and that the patient-centered part is actually going to transform the meaning of patient-centered. And AI in medicine particularly has to be understood within the context of a growing gap in primary care. And this is a generational opportunity to reimagine clinical care. And very importantly, it's an opportunity to inject our values into these AIs. Because, to cut to the chase, who are these AIs working for? And who are they being aligned for? And so I'll finish up with some key questions that require prompt attention or else. So let's go. I hope someone already showed you this slide. This shows how over a period of 3 years, we went from GPT-0 essentially not being able to do as well as the worst medical student in the world to being better in 3 years than 90% of medical doctors, and this is true both of GPT-4 and of the Gemini models from Google. And it's only going to continue to accelerate because these models and their performance scales primarily with two things as far as we can tell: data size and model size. And so in this graphic, you see that for echocardiograms, where you have someone taking an ultrasound picture of your heart, back in 2020, there's a Nature paper where there was 1,000 echoes compared to 1,000 reports, video report. And the task is, can I generate a good report based on the video? Fast forward 4 years, just was published something called Echo Clip, where they go in real time from the video to a cardiology report that is state of the art, as proven by the cardiologist who actually ran the study. And so they involved 1 million of those, and so many things are going to scale up in medicine, and we're only beginning to put online into foundation models these data. And so think about this. Right now, I have to get a referral to a cardiologist. The cardiologist pays the echocardiographer, who is very well trained, does not have an MD, does not have the debt of medical school, does not have the attitudinal debt of medical school, and all of a sudden we can put a primary care practitioner getting echocardiograms that are expert level. And people say, well, maybe these large language models are just retrieving things that are already known. I put out this picture, I gave this picture to GPT-4o when it first came out, And this was a picture that was in the New England Journal of Medicine's challenges for doctors. And no one had ever seen this picture before. And I gave it the history as well, but I removed from the history one important factoid. Now, many doctors were not able to solve this problem. And I gave it the same picture, GPT-4o, again, not a medically tuned model, and I gave it the history where I elided a very important fact. And so it said, it tells me what it sees. It tells me this is bleomycin toxicity, which this was not. That's a chemotherapy drug. Self-inflicted injury, which this was not. Or something I'd never heard of, shiitake mushroom dermatitis. Turns out, the thing I had elided from the description, he had shiitake mushrooms the day before. This thing made a diagnosis that most primary care doctors cannot make. And it just did it out of the box. Things are moving very fast. I want to show you, we just heard a very good talk about rare disease genetics. So let me tell you about this child. This child was not walking, was fine, but at age 4 started losing milestones. Not walking, not talking. Seen many doctors, no diagnosis. Was referred to a network. I'm the principal investigator of the network, the Undiagnosed Disease Network. And we used old school AI. What do I mean by that? Pre-LLM, pre-2017 AI, basically using a variety of machine learning techniques to rank mutations as likely to cause disease. Because by the way, all of us have mutations that if you look in a textbook actually cause disease. So the challenge is not to find the mutation, it's to find out which of the 5 mutations you have are the one that actually causes the disease. And so we referred this patient got referred, and sure enough, this kid had a mutation in something called, into this cyclohydrolase, which is an enzyme that develops, that synthesizes neurotransmitters. And then we gave this kid a cocktail of neurotransmitters, which bypasses, and he was walking and talking within weeks. Amazing. So that's old school AI. And then I got hit, I got hit like a ton of bricks. I got a call from Peter Lee, from head of Microsoft Research, back in October of 2022. And Peter says, Zach, I can't tell you what it's about, but if you answer my phone call, it's going to be worth your while. I knew Peter from way back. He was a department chair of computer science at CMU. And he said, Satya Nadella has permitted me to share with you what it was. So what he did share with me was basically GPT-4 before you had even heard of ChatGPT, which was originally GPT 3.5. And so after I went through all my phases of, as a computer scientist, of mourning, denial, anger, and all that, I finally started testing it out, and I gave it a task that the Undiagnosed Disease Network had failed at. Again, this is GPT-4o early on when it had not been completely lobotomized, aligned into its much more compliant form today. And I gave it this case of a patient who had 5 mutations, which were loss of function mutations, but none of them presentations were right. And so I asked it, what was the most likely diagnosis? And it gave me, it said Polar 3A is the most likely diagnosis. So that's its opinion. How do I know it's right? Because it's in the same network we have something called a model organism core. So they take the human mutation and using gene editing, CRISPR-Cas, knock it into a fly to see if it gets mutations. And sure enough, it was Polar 3A. By the way, it's now 2 years out of date, but Peter Lee and Carrie Goldberg and I wrote a book where this case appears. So that's pretty mind-blowing that back 2 years ago, this thing could actually work at the expert level in genetics. Now, of course, there's early problems. You've heard about hallucinations, data set shift, and authoritativeness problems and bias. But let me give you a quick story, because there's a big player in between us and patients in hospitals, and those are called electronic health record vendors. And they don't actually have to go through the same approval process that someone who is selling a AI widget might have to do, because you already have approved the whole EHR package. And so during COVID, Epic created a predictor of deterioration, which was important because we thought we were going to run out of beds in the ICU. And so we had to know who was going to deteriorate. So it was implemented and at a bunch of hospitals. And then a bunch of my nerd friends at a different hospital at the University of Michigan, also doctors, love the language. This one guy in particular is like a Julia language lover, never understood that. And he showed that this was very poorly calibrated. In other words, the patients in their hospital were not actually as bad as this thing thought, and in fact, some of the worst patients were ranked as being less likely to deteriorate. And why was that? Different mix of patients, different patients come in the door with different levels of illness for that hospital as compared to another hospital, and different practices. And then 6 months later, all the predictions went to hell in any hospital because the virus had changed a little bit, but what had changed is our practice of medicine. We knew that dexamethasone was actually the right drug all of a sudden. So everything changed, and so everybody switched off those algorithms. But this is not an exception. This is the rule. Medicine is changing all the time. Medical practice changes from location to location with the population. And so the data set shift over time and geography is huge, and the regulatory process that we currently have is completely silent on that, and the FDA knows it. Now, I want to get to the point of values. With several of my colleagues, I published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine talking about medical artificial intelligence and human values. And we talk about the various places that human values get injected into these models, into the training data, which we always hear a lot of, during the model development phase, and during the model use, during the alignment. And I'm going to focus on this last part, the last part of the alignment. And so in this New England Journal article, which we published this year, we take a case of a child, a 14-year-old who's short and has a growth hormone stimulation test that's somewhere in the middle. And again, this is GPT-4, not a medically tuned thing. And we align it in context. There's many ways to do alignment, which those of you who are computer scientists know about, whether it's fine-tuning or RLHF. We just did in context prompts to do alignment at runtime. And so in the first case, we said, you are a pediatric endocrinologist with a request to the boy's insurance company seeking treatment approval given its findings. And it gives actually a very, very good recommendation. But if we tell it it's working for the insurance company, it gives a very thoughtful reason not to give the patient the drug. Now, do you not think that that alignment can be done by someone throughout our healthcare system? Who's going to do it? In whose benefit? And you do know that there's lots of aligning being happening by these big data companies, but when the insurance companies or the hospitals get involved, what do you think is going to happen? This is absolutely essential for, in my opinion, the effect size here is far greater than the effect sizes of some of the bias effects that we've published so much about in the past. And so we have to figure out who's going to do the steering of these models. I think it's absolutely a societal challenge, and it's not something that we can have a bunch of pointy-head nerds like us determine. There has to be a public debate about what are the values that we want to adopt. And so President Biden put out a executive order which basically said, watch out, you need to get in order, and that meant that all the agencies had to develop chief AI officers, look at all the AI widgets and figure out which of the AI widgets were safe or not safe. And there's just not that many people who actually understand this domain. And so it's a little bit scattered, but they've had to do it. And meanwhile, in my own journal, we asked about how governance is done in these various hospitals. And I like this one quote in the journal. It says, well, nothing's been regulated to date, really. Our regulatory framework is very challenging, but I think since it hasn't existed, we have functioned under the belief that we can be marketed crap at any time, basically, and that's what happens. The vendor markets a model, and the R squared is 0.09. It says that in the model brief, but unless you have people who actually understand biostatistics, read that small fine print, they're literally marketing that. But people don't know that means the model doesn't do anything for you. I think that's the current state, represents well the current state of governance in medical centers. And in terms of going slow, on the one hand, we also published this paper where we show, by the way, that probably most of the activity is happening in China right now, and we don't have a good beat on that. But even in the United States, we have 600 FDA approvals for software as a medical device on AI widgets. But these are all old school CNNs with mostly CNNs with in a supervised mode and in a supervised learning mode. And here's the point: they get approved, but they're getting approved relative to the task that they set themselves with the data that they set themselves. It doesn't say anything about generalization or working in other populations. And I can tell you, as a journal editor, I'm getting now many articles about these FDA-approved devices, which don't perform anything like what they were doing. And in fact, I'm getting startup CEOs contacting me and says, Zach, do I really need to get this FDA clearance? Because the insurers don't care whether they got FDA clearance because they know it's not a measure of value. So that tells you what the Wild West we are in. And so, as noted, we have to do more detail. And I'd like to just call out two important things. There's something called CHI, which is this big national effort to do sort of conformance testing. And initially, they were off to a wrong footing. And John Brownstein, who you heard earlier today, sent us with Chris Longhurst a paper which just said, at the time urgently, we really need to look at clinical effectiveness rather than just compliance. And now CHI has changed. At the same time, Damon Blumenthal wrote an article where, with Baku Patel from Google, in our same journal, where he made a very interesting point. We don't, just by answering the medical licensing exams better than any doctor, doesn't mean you're a good doctor. So he basically writes in this article, we need to evaluate these things the way we're evaluating doctors in the clinics, by their performance, by their behavior, and I think that's right. We don't have robust means other than looking at how they behave as doctors. And here's something very important. I heard a lot about patient-centered. I think it's even more acute than you realize. Here's a boy who, at age 5 or 4, started having trouble walking, started having trouble chewing, then started having intractable headaches. His mom went to 17 doctors. They got MRIs of the head, of the spine, you name it, hundreds of thousands of dollars of workup. And then after 3 years, it happened what always happens in medicine when we don't have an answer, was referred for psychiatric evaluation. And then the mother, not a doctor, but a smart marketing executive, took all her data, not the images, just the text, and shoved them into GPT-4 and said, what's wrong with my kid? And GPT-4 said, oh, I'm not a doctor, but most likely this is tethered cord syndrome. So your spine, your spinal cord is a bundle of nerves, and towards the end of it, it looks like a sort of shaggy horsetail, and it can get trapped in your spinal column. The bones of your spine can actually trap it. And then it's pulling on your spinal cord when you walk. So, think about, dragging the leads into your computer like several times a day. And so it's calling also sparks and badness. And so she goes to a doctor who I'm proud to say is a Harvard Medical School trained doctor in Michigan, a neurosurgeon, and she looks at mom says, is this tethered cord syndrome? The doctor looks at the MRI and says, yeah, it's tethered cord syndrome. And they operate the kid, and the kid's fine. So what happened? Very classical. MRI was done, incorrectly interpreted by someone who had not seen a lot of tethered cord. And then no one ever looked back at the original MRI. This doctor, God bless her, did what we always expect doctors to do, looked at the thing and said, oh yeah, this is happening all the time. I can't tell you in our undiagnosed disease network how many times we get a patient who, and then we just look at the record, doesn't even require genetic diagnosis. just requires you having your head screwed on and looking at it right. Okay, and I just got shown the 2-minute sign. I'm going to take 5 minutes. Too bad. You need to hear this. Right now, the primary care is disappearing. When my faculty come from, let's say, Stanford, and I try to find them a doctor in Boston, I cannot find it. I went to all my friends at MGB. There's not a single open primary care practice. The only way you can do it is if you are willing to pay for a concierge service. So don't tell me about equity and AI. In the current system, you have to be paying $10,000 for a concierge doctor if you want to be seen anytime soon. And the supply is really, really tough. And so at a 5-year level, here is the challenge. We do have a lot of nurse practitioners and physician assistants. And this is where I think Northeastern can absolutely lead in AI, which is to take these wonderfully trained, good-hearted, non-medical attitude, non-medical debt group of individuals and give them the superpowers to make them at least as meticulous and insightful as current primary care, and in combination. And next slide. This is just to remind me, we really have to do a lot of evaluation. Turns out sometimes doctor plus AI is better. Sometimes AI by itself is better than the doctor or doctor plus AI. It's a longer story. I'm not given time. So here's what I want to tell you. We've all heard about inverted classroom. We have to build the inverted clinic. That is what we have to do. Because hospitals are failing. Hospitals are high revenue, low margin institutions. MGB gets billions of dollars, but its margins on a good day is 1% to 2%, which means their appetite for risk is zero. And they're doing a lot of work, and I heard some of my colleagues from MGB, but changing the actual central practice of care is like asking Google to replace a search with GPT-4 today. For many good reasons, it's not going to happen fast. So what does inverting the clinic look like? It has the doctor interacting with the patient as per usual, and in addition, she's going to have, in addition to all the things she usually has in trying to decide what therapies to give, she also has an AI widget robot, guardian angel, working with her. But the patient will have at least as much. They will have all, the right access to formulary, right medications, and analyses in the ways we just heard about. And it takes a village. We're going to have to use people at work to help, let's say, exercise with us, or change the way we eat, or make sure there's time for the medications. And there'll be direct help by a patient-centered AI and from the family. And I'm going to close by saying, remember the dangers of early prophecy. This is something I wrote with my thesis advisor back in 1994 called the Guardian Angel Project, funded by ARPA back in 1994. We were so early, we actually had a 2-letter domain, which we still have, ga.org, and we described that. And it's only now that I think we can actually reach that many, many decades later. So here's my urgent questions. How will we ensure that patients benefit from AI healthcare applications? Because guess what? The biggest AI application in healthcare is improving billing based on looking at the record. For sure. That's what Epic is selling. Look at the records and I can upcode you better. Where and how will health professionals or patients inject societal patient values? I think it's absolutely central. We're not hearing out. We're sort of passively, we need to have debiasing. Where are the values? Where is the alignment happening? And in which clinical context will we evaluate AI models? Compared to what? Compared to the system we think we have as opposed to the system we actually have. And last, how do we create a growing AI-enabled healthcare workforce? Thank you very much.